there are many ways to connect with someone that are not physical. In fact, you can even connect with your boyfriend or girlfriend in an emotional way that ends up being sinful, even if you don't commit any sexual acts together. I would call that an emotional promiscuity, where you're going in places in your heart that you shouldn't be going unless you're married with that person. That's another topic for another day. Let me know in the comments if that's something you want me to talk more about. But what about physical intimacy? Some people's love language is physical touch. And as we know, our bodies are an important part of who we are. God has wired us to our bodies. So how can we engage this part of who we are during the dating phase? In this video, I'm going to talk about 5 ways that you can actually connect physically during the dating season with your boyfriend or girlfriend without sinning. And just so you know, I'm going to start really general and then work my way down to very specific things. So make sure you watch the whole video because there's a progression to this content. Number 1, do anything physical together that is not sexual. So if you clicked on this video hoping that I was going to give you some sort of tip on how to connect sexually without sinning before marriage, I'm sorry to disappoint you. That's just not a biblical option at all. So stick with me though, because you will be able to connect physically but not sexually before marriage. And if you want to know more about how that's true, that any sexual activity under any category would be considered sin apart from being done in marriage, you can see that principle laid out very clearly throughout Scripture. But for example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 9, Paul's very clear that singles have 2 options when it comes to sexual desire. They can remain abstinent and control their passions, or they can get married and enjoy those passions with their spouse. There's no other room in between. However, the next natural question then that you may be asking is, well, what is sexual activity? What is any sexual activity that you're saying is sin? Obviously, we know that intercourse is sex. We know that obvious acts of foreplay would be sex, where you're engaging each other's, sexual organs and you're causing arousal. Obviously, that's sex, sexual. But what about tongue in the kissing? Is it sexual, or just are no tongue kissing non-sexual? Or what about laying on the couch spooning together? Is that sexual, or is it only sexual if you two are laying on top of each other, basically, engaging in rubbing acts that are sexual, and you just have your clothes on still? So my best answer to that type of question is to pay attention to your sexual organs. I'm sorry to be blunt here, but if you're a man and you're getting an erection, and you're a woman and you're getting physically aroused down there, you know what I mean? Well, then it's gone too far. Something sexual is occurring for you. And, you may be able to kiss in one context and then not be a sexual activity, where in another context and you're alone and you're tired and whatever, you start kissing in a way that's foreplay and it's leading to sexual activities. That's a sin. In truth, however, I think we all know when something's sexual in nature versus it not being sexual in nature. So that's the category. If it's sexual, don't do it. Number 2, find ways to enjoy physical labor together. A couple can only talk so much. There's only so much emotional connecting that you can do. And in truth, even if you're not touching each other's bodies at all, if you're talking enough and you're going up into a place emotionally enough and you're going deep in that area, that can be sexually arousing as well and cause a lot of temptation that leads you down into a physical act. So how can a couple connect in a physical way without sinning? One way, which sounds kind of weird, so stick with me, is doing something with their bodies that involves manual labor or just extreme physical activity. So when people do hard things together with their bodies, that creates a bond that can't be experienced unless you go through that physical activity together. And I think probably the best way to see this principle is to think about people who you work with or have worked with in the past. You end up forming a bond with people that you at your jobs because you are doing something physical together, particularly if there's manual labor involved. So, for example, let's say two female nurses have to do something difficult to help a patient. After they're done with that difficult task, there's an extra bond that those two now have that creates a special connection with them that no one else has because they did this thing together that was hard. And if those two nurses, those female nurses, do that for years and years together at their work, it's likely those two become very close friends. However, what often happens is that someone has to change jobs, and then slowly over time, you lose connection with that person. You still love them, but you're not as close as you once were because the work is no longer connecting you. Or maybe two male mechanics have to lift something super heavy that's dangerous. Like if one of them drops it, the other person's going to get hurt. And that type of activity builds trust and respect in each other. And you end up forming a bond that can grow over time when you keep working together. Ecclesiastes 4:9 states, "Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil." When you toil together, it creates a bond. You can harness this principle to connect in dating as well. Find service projects to participate in. Try to build something useful together. Do landscaping together. Do an active hobby together, like hiking or joining the co-ed softball team or working out. Number 3, spend time alone with this person while you both are actively resisting the sexual tension that will be building during that time. Please stick with me during this whole point before you say something in the comments about this, because I have a nuanced, balanced view that you need to listen to. This is not a good point for those of you who like to hear the snippet and then respond instantly. So as a Christian dating couple, you certainly need to be wise in your alone time. Nothing good is going to happen at 1 a.m. in a dark room when you two are alone. That's just a bad idea. However, I also think that a lot of Christians go too far because we know that there's obviously a danger with sexual temptation and sin when the boyfriend and girlfriend are alone together. And to solve that problem, a lot of times we say you should never be alone together. Just don't ever do that. And I personally think that's an overreaction and unwise counsel for a couple of reasons. First off, if this couple lacks so much self-control that they literally can't spend any time alone without jumping on each other and touching each other's private parts, that's a problem, and you lack enough self-control to be in a mature marriage. Additionally, I believe the point of dating or courting should be to figure out if you should marry someone. And I think it's a ludicrous idea to never be alone with someone that you're considering marrying, because when you're married, a ton of your time is going to be alone. So if you have to have other people in your dynamic to make this relationship work and to enjoy each other's company, that's not marriage material. Therefore, I think a dating couple needs to spend healthy, wise time alone. And now you're saying, well, isn't there going to be sexual tension there? And my answer to that is yes, there is going to be sexual tension there. And that's not bad. You want there to be sexual tension with the person that you're considering marrying. If there's no sexual tension and you're not attracted to that person, that's actually a red flag because marriage involves sexual intimacy. So sin occurs when you cross the line and you give in to the sexual tension, you give in to the temptation that your flesh is producing, and you engage in lustful thinking or in sexual acts together. Now, here's what I want to talk about though, because this whole video is about how can you connect physically with your boyfriend or girlfriend without sinning. In a way, this idea of spending time alone with your boyfriend and girlfriend and resisting sexual tension is a physical act together because it involves your body, it involves self-control, it involves paying attention to how you two are treating each other physically. And biblically, God calls us to worship Him with our bodies. For example, in Romans 12, verse 1. And worshiping God is obviously going to bring you closer to somebody when you're doing that together. So, with all that said, please also heed this warning that I'm giving you right now. Everything I just said needs to be taken in context and considered in a mature, balanced, biblical way. You can spend too much time alone. Resisting sexual tension is tiring. And if you are resisting it too long, it's going to wear you out and you're going to break down. So you cannot push this too far. You have to be wise. Limit your time, alone time together. Have boundaries with it. Don't completely erase it, but do it in a wise way that you both can handle. And lastly, just make sure you both are mature enough to express that, hey, this needs to stop. Like I'm past my limit of being able to resist this sexual tension. This is affecting my body. I need to move. I need to separate from you. And in a mature way, this should be seen as a compliment. You know, your boyfriend or girlfriend should be like, I respect that. You know, he's attracted to me or she's attracted to me, and we want to honor the Lord with our bodies. You know, so hopefully we can get married and enjoy this the right way. Number 4, share physical acts of affection that you would be comfortable doing in front of other people, like your pastor, for example. So as I talked about in point 1, anything that's not sexual is on the table, you know? So you just have to decide what is an act of affection that we can experience that's not sexual in nature. And that's going to require honesty and integrity. And one of the ways that you can gauge this that's really helpful, a good rule of thumb, is to ask yourself, would this be uncomfortable to do in front of someone else? Like someone I respect, like my pastor, for example. You know, there's a difference between a peck on the lips, you're saying goodbye to someone, where it would be not so weird to do in front of your pastor, versus making out. That's different, right? You're going to feel weird about that if you're doing that in front of your pastor. If you're sitting on the couch in such a way where it shows, oh, that couple is probably dating. They're sitting very close. They're holding hands. Maybe he has his arm around her. That's one thing. I don't think your pastor would be like, my gosh, what are you doing, right? But if you're laying on top of each other under a blanket, that's crossing the line sexually, because obviously that's going to produce a lot of sexual tension. And your pastor's going to be like, I don't want to see that. Like, what are you doing? This is not healthy for you. So again, I'm just using the pastor example because it's an obvious spiritual figure in our lives that that we've given some authority to lovingly correct us, right? So do that same thing with other people. And I know a lot of you are like, well, just imagine Jesus sitting there in the room. Jesus is always with us, but God uses other people in the flesh who are there right now in the flesh to convict us. The Holy Spirit is the one bringing that conviction through that person in a loving way, and of course in our own hearts. So also in this one, let me give you some practical tips that I've found helpful over time when trying to counsel boyfriends and girlfriends in this area. Big tip, don't lay down together. Just don't do it. Laying down together is a signal for your body to relax, to be vulnerable, and that's just how sex happens. You're laying down together. So it triggers something in your body. If you guys want to lay down together and watch a movie, lay down on separate couches. If you want to sit by each other, sit vertical. Yeah, things can still happen. I'm not saying this is foolproof, but it's just an easier way to stay pure towards each other. Another good tip, keep your hands off the obvious hot zones. We all know the hot zones, right? Breasts, butts, inner thighs, genitals. If your hands are in those areas, it's gone too far. And again, like I mentioned in the last one, make sure you're just verbally transparent. If it's getting too hot, if it's for you, just verbalize that. You have to be comfortable with this person. If you can't have vulnerable conversations, that's not a good sign that you're headed towards marriage anyway. So get comfortable having vulnerable conversations, because that's needed for a healthy relationship. And lastly, number 5, focus your physical energy on figuring out if you two should break up or get married. Perhaps the biggest reasons Christian dating couples fall into sexual sin is because they have a bad view of dating. They think having a boyfriend or girlfriend is like a great thing in and of itself, and it's not. It shouldn't be a goal to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It should be a goal to either figure out if this person is going to be your husband or wife. big picture, you have to know what the end goal is of what you're doing in dating. And when you date just to date because you like this idea of having a boyfriend or girlfriend, that's usually when sexual sin occurs, because you're pretending to have this relationship that God is blessing, but he's not, if it's not headed towards marriage. Because the only thing in the Bible about long-term healthy relationships is marriage. God's wired you to be thriving best in romance in marriage. And we can use dating in a biblical way when we're trying to use it to figure out if you should or shouldn't marry this person. So if you're unsure, you're like, I don't know if I should marry this person, keep dating them. That's the point of dating. But if you're like, I know I'm not going to marry this person, break up immediately. If you're like, yeah, I know I am going to marry this person, then use your body and your physical energy to get your life in order and get married. Do you need to get a better job? Do you need to save money? Do you need to move out of your parents' house? Do you need to finish that college degree? Do you need to go to counseling and get that work done? Do you need to have those hard conversations? I don't know what it is for you guys, but whatever it needs to be done, use your physical energy together to work towards this goal of marriage, and that's going to make you connected even more. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. For more topics like this, more conversations about Christian dating, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Until next time, God bless.